Michel was known in the neighborhood as the mechanic who never complained, even though life had given him countless reasons to do so. His garage was nothing more than a narrow tin-roofed shed wedged between a small tea stall and an abandoned warehouse, its walls cracked, floor soaked with oil stains that no amount of cleaning could erase. Every morning before the sun rose, Michel would unlock the rusted shutter with aching hands and a silent prayer, hoping the day would bring enough work to survive another night. His clothes were always smeared with grease, his fingers rough and scarred from years of burns, cuts, and broken nails, yet there was a calm dignity in the way he carried himself. People often judged him by his worn shoes and tired eyes, never guessing the depth of skill hidden behind his quiet presence. To Michel, cars were never just metal and engines. They were stories, memories, and sometimes the last hope a person had. Years ago, he had lost his father in an accident caused by a poorly repaired vehicle, and since that day, he had promised himself that no car would ever leave his garage unsafe if he had the power to stop it. Poverty followed him like a shadow. Rent was always overdue, meals were often skipped, and loneliness filled the small room he called home. Still, Michel never allowed bitterness to take root in his heart. He believed that honest labor, done with sincerity, carried its own meaning, even if the world refused to notice. It was on a suffocating afternoon, when dust hung thick in the air and business had been painfully slow, that something unusual happened. A battered, faded car rolled to a stop in front of Michel's garage, pushed carefully by two men while a woman sat inside, completely still except for her trembling hands. The car looked as exhausted as Michel felt, paint peeling, headlights cracked, engine coughing weakly as if it might collapse at any moment. As Michel approached, his eyes were drawn not to the car, but to the woman sitting in the driver's seat. Her face was pale, her legs covered with a thin blanket, her posture rigid as if movement itself caused pain. One of the men explained that she had been paralyzed from the waist down after an accident, and that the car had been breaking down repeatedly. When Michel leaned closer to speak with her, she gathered her strength and whispered, "Please! I know this car is old. I don't have much money. But this car is the only way I can live without depending on others. If it stops working, I'm trapped." Her words struck Michel deeply. He noticed how tightly she clutched the steering wheel, as though it was the last thing holding her world together. A quick glance told him the truth. This car needed far more than a simple repair. The engine was failing, the controls were unsuitable for her condition, and the cost would be far beyond what someone like her could afford. Yet Michel didn't see numbers or problems in that moment. He saw fear, dignity, and a quiet desperation that felt painfully familiar. Michel stood silently for several seconds, his mind racing through worries he could barely afford to think about. The landlord's warnings echoed in his head, along with the memory of empty cupboards and unpaid bills. Any reasonable mechanic would have refused the job or demanded money up front. But reason had never ruled Michel's heart. Slowly, he crouched beside the car so he could look directly at the woman and said, "I'll fix it. I'll make sure it doesn't fail you again." She looked at him in disbelief and asked softly, "How much will it cost?" Michel hesitated, then replied, "Pay what you can, later. Right now, let me do my work." Tears slipped down her cheeks before she could stop them, and she turned her face away, ashamed of crying in front of a stranger. From that moment onward, Michel worked as if the car were his own lifeline. He arrived before dawn and stayed long after midnight, using salvaged parts, modifying the pedals, reinforcing weak joints, and reshaping the controls so she could drive safely with her hands alone. He sold one of his own tools to buy essential components, ignored the pain in his back and hands, and survived on little more than tea and bread. Other mechanics mocked him, calling him foolish for helping someone who might never repay him. But Michel paid no attention. Each tightened bolt felt like a quiet rebellion against a world that rewarded greed and punished kindness. He wasn't fixing just a car, he was protecting someone's independence. As the days passed, Michel learned small things about the woman without asking too many questions. Her name was Sarah. She spoke gently, choosing her words carefully, as if every sentence hid something unsaid beneath it. Sometimes she sat in the car while Michel worked, watching him with an expression that held gratitude, curiosity, and something deeper he couldn't name. She never complained, never hurried him, and always thanked him as if words were the only currency she had left. Michel noticed details that didn't quite add up: how she avoided conversations about her past, how she looked uneasy whenever expensive cars passed by the road, how her manner carried a quiet elegance that didn't match her worn clothes or broken vehicle. Still, Michel never questioned her. He was too busy questioning himself. Late at night, lying on the cold floor of his room, he wondered if helping her would ultimately ruin him. But every morning, when he returned to the garage and saw Sarah waiting patiently, his doubts faded away. He had no idea that this simple act of kindness, born from empathy, not expectation, was setting the stage for a revelation that would soon turn his entire life upside down. What Michel believed was just another repair job was, in truth, the beginning of a story far greater than he could ever imagine. The day Michel finally turned the ignition key after weeks of relentless work, the sound that came from the engine was smooth, steady, almost unreal. For a moment, he just stood there, hands resting on the hood, listening as if the car itself was breathing again after a long illness. The garage smelled of oil and sweat, but beneath it lingered something unfamiliar: hope. Sarah sat in the driver's seat, her hands gripping the customized controls Michel had designed especially for her eyes wide as if she were afraid the moment would vanish if she blinked. Michel explained every adjustment carefully, his voice calm though his body trembled with exhaustion. He had rebuilt the engine almost entirely, reinforced the suspension, rewired the electrical system, and transformed the controls so she could drive independently with confidence. Each change carried the weight of sleepless nights and sacrifices he never spoke about. When Sarah gently pressed the accelerator and the car moved forward without hesitation, a soft gasp escaped her lips. Tears welled in her eyes, spilling down her cheeks as she whispered, "I forgot what it feels like to move without fear." Michel turned away, pretending to clean his tools, embarrassed by the tightness in his chest. He had fixed many cars in his life, but never had a machine given someone their freedom back. In that moment, the hunger, the pain, the mockery, all of it felt strangely insignificant. Word of Michel's work slowly spread through the neighborhood, but not in the way success usually arrives. There were no wealthy customers lining up, no sudden miracles. Instead, people came quietly: an old man needing a small repair, a delivery driver asking for advice, each drawn by stories of a mechanic who worked with heart instead of greed. Meanwhile, Sarah continued to visit the garage even after the repairs were complete. Sometimes she came just to sit, sometimes to talk, sometimes to watch Michel work in silence. She insisted on paying him something, pressing folded bills into his hand whenever she could, though Michel knew it barely covered the cost of parts. Still, he accepted it to preserve her dignity. He noticed how she never spoke about family, how she avoided questions about her past, how her phone, old and cracked, never rang unless she stepped away to answer in hushed tones. There were moments when expensive cars slowed down near the garage, their drivers glancing towards Sarah before moving on. Michel felt there was something she wasn't telling him, but he had learned long ago that everyone carried wounds best left untouched. Trust, to him, was not built through questions, but patience. As days turned into weeks, Michel's health began to suffer. The long hours, skipped meals, and constant strain took their toll. His hands shook at times, and sharp pains stabbed his back when he bent down. One evening, he nearly collapsed while lifting a tire, catching himself just in time. Sarah noticed immediately. Her face filled with concern as she urged him to rest, her voice carrying an authority that surprised him. "You can't destroy yourself for others," she said softly. Michel smiled weakly and replied, "This work is all I have." Something flickered in her eyes, guilt, perhaps, or determination. The next day, she returned with a small package of food and medicine, placing it quietly on his workbench without explanation. Michel tried to refuse, but she insisted, saying, "Let me help you, just this once." It was the first time the roles between them felt blurred, as if kindness was moving in both directions now. That night, Michel lay awake wondering how someone who claimed to have so little could give so much. On a quiet afternoon, as the sun dipped low and shadows stretched across the garage floor, Sarah prepared to leave. Before starting the engine, she turned to Michel and said, "Tomorrow I'll come back, but not as a customer." Her words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. Michel asked what she meant, but she only smiled, a small, knowing smile that unsettled him. "Just promise me one thing," she said. "No matter what happens, don't regret being kind." With that, she drove away, leaving Michel standing alone with a strange unease in his chest. He didn't know why her words felt like a goodbye, or why, for the first time in years, he sensed that his life was about to change in ways he could not control. The next morning began like any other. Michel arrived at the garage early, unlocked the shutter, and started organizing his tools. Yet something felt different, as if the air itself carried anticipation. An hour passed. Then another. Sarah didn't arrive. Michel told himself not to overthink it. Customers came and went, lives moved on. But just as doubt began to settle, the sound of engines filled the street, deep and powerful, unlike anything that usually passed through the neighborhood. One by one, sleek black luxury vehicles rolled to a stop outside the garage, their polished surfaces reflecting the stunned faces of bystanders. People gathered, whispering in disbelief. Michel stepped outside, his heart pounding, unsure whether he was about to be in trouble or part of some elaborate mistake. Then the doors of the lead car opened, and Sarah emerged, not in worn clothes, but in an elegant outfit, standing with the support of a discreet brace and an assistant at her side. For a moment, Michel didn't recognize her. She looked stronger, taller, transformed. Their eyes met, and he saw the same warmth he remembered, but now it was joined by something else, authority. She approached him slowly as everyone watched in silence. "Michel," she said, her voice steady, "I owe you the truth." She explained that she was not just a struggling woman with a broken car. She was the founder and CEO of a global automotive company, forced into secrecy after an accident and betrayal within her own organization. The paralysis had been real. The pain had been real. But the disguise, the broken car, the silence, had been her way of seeing the world without filters, to understand who helped without expecting reward. "Many people turned away," she said. "Some demanded money I didn't have on me. Others pitied me. But you saw me." The crowd gasped. Michel felt the ground shift beneath his feet. He tried to speak, to deny it, to make sense of what he was hearing, but words failed him. Sarah continued, "I didn't come to test you. I came because I was desperate. What you gave me wasn't a car, it was dignity." She turned toward the gathered crowd and announced that Michel's garage would become the foundation of a new training and innovation center under her company, providing opportunities to mechanics who had talent but no resources. She offered Michel a position he had never imagined, not as an employee, but as a partner. Cameras appeared. Applause erupted. But Michel heard none of it. His mind was locked on one thought: he had helped her without knowing who she was. And that, she explained, was exactly why she trusted him. "If kindness needs a reason," she said, looking directly at him, "then it isn't kindness at all." Tears streamed down Michel's face as years of struggle, doubt, and loneliness finally broke free. He hadn't chased success. He hadn't demanded recognition. And yet, it had found him anyway. Later, when the crowd dispersed and silence returned to the garage, Michel and Sarah stood alone. The luxury cars were gone, but the weight of what had happened remained. Michel finally spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. "I would have helped you, even if you were no one." Sarah smiled gently. "That's why you became everything," she replied. In that moment, Michel understood that his life had not changed because of money or opportunity, but because the values he had clung to in poverty had carried him through to something greater. The garage that once barely survived would soon change countless lives, but Michel would never forget the days when all he had was faith in honest work and compassion. His story was no longer just about a poor mechanic or a hidden secret. It was proof that sometimes, the smallest acts of kindness echo the loudest, shaping destinies in ways no one could ever predict.